Welcome back to the Raw Selection Private Equity Podcast. Joining us today is Bill Bell, CRO at Chief Outsiders. Today, we're going to dive into one of my favorite topics, which is all about building the sales engine and the organic growth of a business. Let's dive in. Bill, if you could share with us a brief insight into you, please.
Sure, yes. So I currently work as a Fractional Chief Revenue Officer for a company called Chief Outsiders. We're a very large consulting firm. I do work for mostly middle market companies, private equity companies, ranging anywhere from $50 to $500 million in revenue. Mostly work on actually the top line revenue structure. I've spent about 40 years in industrial manufacturing, ran 5 different companies, both domestically and globally. Started doing this work about 2019. So,
Marvelous. What's one mistake that you see either private equity or portfolio companies making, and what would you suggest to correct them?
well, the most common mistake I see in private equity firms is they do this, rigorous financial, legal, operational due diligence before a deal, but their commercial due diligence, surprisingly, is fairly thin. They usually do a market sizing exercise that confirms the addressable market, some management reviews that confirm the CEO is optimistic, but almost never do they examine with the same rigor the balance sheet as the revenue engine. Things like the sales process, the pipeline discipline, the CRM, the pricing governance, and really whether the sales leader is leading or just carrying the big accounts. So typically what they do is they underwrite this big aggressive growth thesis on the commercial organization that was never really designed to build it or to deliver it. And then about 12 months into it, the revenue's lagging and the reflective fix is always, let's hire more salespeople. That mistake just compounds the first, because when you add more headcount to a broken infrastructure, you don't really add revenue, you just add more cost. So the new reps land in the environment with no onboarding, no defined sales stage, no coaching cadence. And when you're in a complex industrial sale that has a 12 to 18-month ramp, normally the salespeople, they flame out or quietly underperform. And then you've spent about 150, 200 grand per head with nothing to show for it. So the fix that I always say is you got to do things in reverse. You got to diagnose first, fix the infrastructure second, and then add capacity. So I normally say before you close, or at least 100 days after, you really need to do a commercial maturity diagnostic, which I normally would do with the PE firms that I work with. And there's basically 4 things that you need to do. You need to see if there's a documented sales process that the people follow. And you need to make sure that the pipeline is governed with honest forecasting. You need to make sure that there's a comp plan that's designed to create new business, not just account maintenance. And you need to make sure that the sales manager is actually managing, not just selling. So that's normally what I see. The PE firms, that's the mistake they make. And I see it, man, I'll say probably 70% of the time. So,
I think you're being kind on 70. I think a lot of the firms have it, and it's one of the positions that's not as well replaced, because I don't think private equity have the understanding from a sales leadership competency basis of what makes a good sales leader. And I think part of it's also they're terrified of making a change there on the basis that they believe that companies only trade with people because of relationships. Whereas
yeah.
actually, as you will know, of course, that actual change of suppliers pretty complex, especially in
Right.
an industrial setting of product production. To change suppliers, you're not doing it just because the sales manager of the business is your good buddy and brings custard creams around every time he looks to
Right.
sell. I'd love to dive into each of those sections, but we're not going to have time. So I'm going to dive into one actually. From a sales manager, like assessment basis, when you go into assess companies and review them, what is the things that you're looking for that tick the boxes from a sales leadership? There's going to be a ton, but if you just focus on, hey, these are the 3 ones that if it was just basic and you had a 15-minute look, you would want to know that these 3 things are here. So then everybody can mirror that in their private equity world.
from a sales management standpoint,
Yeah.
you're asking. Yeah. I mean, the first thing is sales managers, a lot of people hire or move their sales manager from their sales team to their sales manager. Two different skill sets, two completely different skill sets.
Yep.
Normally, a good salesman doesn't always make a good sales manager. A good sales manager is very analytical, knows how to understand sales processes, sales structure, sales compensation that drives results, sales leadership, completely different skill set from a sales person. I see this mistake all the time. Um, So really from a sales management standpoint, it needs to be a person, it's kind of like an engineer more than a salesperson. It's a analytical individual that can look at, let's say, a pipeline and understand where things are moving and how to structure a process to understand how to move deals through a process and how to analyze whether those deals are going to land or not, and how to analyze, you know, the certain situations. Uh, Typically, it's a unique skill set that's not normally relevant in a salesperson.
Yeah, I
So,
agree with. I think you're looking for people that can dive into the details, that can coach on sales. That usually, I don't know if you've done insights and things like that, but usually, which is the antithesis of the opposite of a very good sales leader in the most part from a speed to competency basis, but usually high blue, very detailed, follow processes, build processes, implement processes.
right,
Usually want too much detail before they jump on a call and into a sales process, so they usually freeze. But when it comes down to making people accountable to the process,
right.
building the actual engines that's replicatable across all of your salespeople. Those are the guys that are usually there, and they're not, as you say, the strongest
Mhm.
salespeople in usual. Um, so looking at the from the sales manager to looking at the sales team. So if we look at kind of my take from sales from a like many manufacturing companies that we work with, what they typically do is they go out there and they hire external sales reps. They're the atypical playbook is we hire people from our competition that hopefully have a black book, and we hope that they're going to be able to sell because we've got no way of measuring their sales competency. What's your take on how manufacturing companies should structure their sales engine?
Well, I see that a lot all the time. Back when I was a sales manager, my CEO used to say, go hire your biggest competitor." And I'm like, "Listen, here's the problem with here's the problem with that. That black book walks in the door, and that black book walks out the
Out the
door.
door. Yeah.
You haven't built anything. You haven't built a thing. All you've done is you've rented someone's relationship for as long as they stay. And what you've done is your growth completely is dependent on one person, which is the exact same fragility as a founder who keeps the whole pipeline in his head. I see that all the time as well. So you're not really building sales capability, you're building individual heroics. And hope is not a strategy. So most of the time it doesn't work because the rep lands in an environment with no process, no support, no system to plug into, and companies conclude that they've hired the wrong person, and they get rid of them, and the person moves on. And so there's no system. So the manufacturing companies, in my mind, should stop trying to hire their way to growth and start building a system. So the goal is to build a sales engine that makes ordinary good salespeople productive, rather than betting everything on finding an extraordinary salesperson. Um, I put it to the board in this way. Revenue growth is an outcome, but sales organization maturity is the input. You don't get output without first building the input. There's a sequence to this, and you need. I said it before. You need to diagnose first the system, build the infrastructure second, and then add headcount last. If you do it the other way, you're adding headcount first, and you're just adding cost. So, um, I when I hire a new sales rep, I have four things that I do or make sure that I have done first before I hire them. One is have a documented sales process. 2 is have good CRM governance, not just software, but governance. 3, have a good pipeline review cadence. And 4, have an onboarding and ramp program so that you can ramp them up fast. You do those things, you don't need to hire the black book. You need to have a good system, then you can hire good people, but you don't have to have that black book walking in the door. So that's how I see it.
Yeah, I think from our take is we spend a lot of time on our sales process and building it out and making sure it's effective. And what we've taken to the fact is if we actually hire people from the competition and from the executive search recruitment industry, they don't tend to be able to operate at the level that we operate at. So we have to look
Mhm.
outside of that, and we look for certain skill competencies, which I talk about a lot with regards to high industriousness, high orderliness, low neuroticism, and high or high speed of learning, which generally concede as intellect, and then it's around building. But to get your insights on the documented sales process, so if we from our perspective, every interaction with every client has a script process around it. Not everything can be scripted, not everything can be documented, and everything there, but the 80% of conversations that come up, we have a process around it. And if it's a taking on a search, pitching for business, assessing a client's pain, problems, challenges, we build a documented sales process. Is that your take on what good looks like? Is there anything
Yeah.
you would add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And, in industrial sales, typically, when I was used to managing salespeople, our sales process was 18 months. We were selling highly specialized robotic industrial, assembly lines. So it was an 18-month process. So you had to have a very structured sales process. So we had stage gates. We had a nine stage gate process. And the first process was actually finding the customer. And there was, a method of how you did it and the questions that you asked, and then the qualification process to determine, yes, this customer has a problem that we can solve. Then, after you've done that, you move to stage gate number 2, which is, okay, the customer has a problem that we can solve. The customer has enough money to buy the product that we sell. And, you move to stage gate and you keep going on stage gate up to stage gate number 9. That takes 18 months to do. So you have to have a very methodical, way of doing that, just like you do, where each stage gate you have a series of questions, qualifications, processes, systems that you can't move. What used to frustrate me in the beginning was, you get to stage gate number 9, and then the sales guy goes, "Well, we lost the order." "Why'd you lose the order?" "He went a different direction." Wait a second. We've been at this for 18 months and we got to stage gate number 9 and you're telling me he went a different direction. What about, so that's why I was really methodical about, you can't get to stage gate number 3 unless you've done all this, everything in stage gate number 2, so that you don't get to number 9 and find out, oh, he went a different direction. So because the other thing that I would tell you, and I'm sure you know this, is biggest expense in sales is selling to a customer that's not going to buy from you. If you spend 18 months selling to a customer and then find out he's not going to buy from you, that's an enormous expense. You want to find out as early as you can in the process that he's not going to buy from you and move on. Right. So,
Yeah, I think that's yeah, absolutely. I think we take accountability during the whole process. So if we there's a great book by Jocko Willink called Extreme Ownership, and we take that all the way through. We deal with obviously when we're introducing people to businesses, there's variances. There's not many products that can turn around and decide that the software's decided it doesn't like your company and doesn't want to work for you. I'm sure in the future that's probably going to happen, but for now it's not. And it's like managing the whole process. If we get to the end of the process and we get an offer and that offer isn't accepted, we've made a mistake because that offer
right,
never should have been extended. That
right.
offer we should have never got to final interview if the candidate wasn't interested. It should be all teed up. It should all be lined up. We should have all the levers done So it's a clean process. And I think there's lots of salespeople that hide behind the fact that, oh well, you can't control things, you can't do this. You can control the whole process, but you can just be aware, hey, you're going to your meeting, I'm coming in to meet with your bill, and you're like, right, what's the likelihood to close this month? We have a guy at final interview. I've told the client I don't think he's going to accept. I've told you that this is a likelihood score of 1 to 4, 4 being it's done, one being we very unlikely. This is a score of 1. We're not putting in the forecast. It might come off, but it's not going to be forecasted. And these are the reasons that I'm trying to resolve. But one is
Right.
we're well out on comp and they can't move. They want to do the final interview and it's up to them what
Yeah.
happens. And that kind of sales process to be able to run through it makes sense. So talk to me, Bill, about your prior experience. So you've not been a chief at Outsiders your whole career.
Yeah.
You've previously served as president and CEO across 5 different companies. And so tell us the biggest success story and what journey you went on during that.
Yeah, I would say my biggest success would be probably with a company called Leadec, which was the last company that I worked for. It was a private equity owned company owned by the sponsor was a company called Triton Equity Partners out of Amsterdam. I stepped in as president and CEO of the North American operations. It was roughly a $180 million company with EBIT margin of about 3%, which is very low. For a PE business, it was kind of the uncomfortable middle. It was too big to be nimble, to not profitable enough to be safe, and had a growth thesis, but the commercial organization wasn't really built to deliver on that. So it was kind of a sequence that I had to go through. The first thing that I did, I wasn't going to chase revenue. I had to build the executive leadership team, and I put a real corporate infrastructure in place and started to scale the company from there. Started putting in a lot of discipline, had to professionalize the commercial function. Then we layered in some M&A, did some integration work, added roughly 45 million in revenue on M&A and added 5 million in EBITDA. And then didn't really, let's say, blow up the operating teams. I carried the people that I had and just focused on building the talent that I had in the organization. Um, And by the end, I grew it from 180 to 325 million in roughly 3.5 years. Doubled the EBIT margin from 3% to 7. It was in a business. It was pretty tough to build EBIT margin. And we were positioned then to sell the company. Unfortunately, I was only running the North American operation, so the global operation was not really positioned for liquidity event. Fortunately, I had negotiated my exit before the private equity company bought it. So I told him I was only going to stay for 3 years. So I was able to get my equity position in 3 years and exit it 2019. So
Absolutely. Well, congratulations on that journey. What do you read, watch, listen to that you recommend that others should check out, please?
well, I'm a big reader of business books about founders and entrepreneurs. So I like books like Shoe Dog about Phil Knight, 0 to 1 about Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, big fan of Elon Musk, as everyone is. The Thinking Machine by Stephen Witt, which is Jensen Young and NVIDIA. Recently, it's strange. My wife drives her nuts, but I'm really into masterclasses. I don't know if you, I last one I watched was Sales and Persuasion by Daniel Pink. Also, Business Leadership with Howard Schultz. Power Mindset with Carol Dweck and Steve Young. So, and I do have a favorite podcast. I have to admit, it's not yours, but anyhow, if you ever listen to a podcast called Founders Podcast
Yeah, it's
by
been
David
recommended a lot,
Senra,
actually. Yeah.
yeah, it's great. He reads these massive books about founders, and then he, in a 1 hour podcast, he summarizes it for you. So it's very good podcast. So
Absolutely. And if anybody wishes to reach out to yourself and Chief Outsiders post this podcast, how best to get in touch, please?
email is wbell@chiefoutsiders.com, or you can reach me on my cell phone, which is 248-982-6459.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming onto the podcast, Bill, and giving us an insight into sales process and building that sales engine.
All right. Great talking to you, Alex.
And as always, thank you very much for everybody for tuning into the Private Equity Podcast. Till the next time, keep smashing it.